In the summer of 2025, a seismic shift rippled through the global aluminum trade, reshaping supply chains, rattling industries, and redefining the economic balance between the United States and Canada. What began as a bold policy move by Ottawa, paired with a fiery protectionist pledge from Donald Trump, evolved into a masterclass in strategic maneuvering, with Canada emerging as an unexpected victor in a high-stakes trade war. This wasn't just about metal, it was about power, resilience, and the future of global manufacturing. As the dust settles, the world watches to see whether Canada's calculated pivot will hold, or if the US will strike back with even greater force. The stage is set for a confrontation that could redraw the map of international commerce. The story began in early July 2025 when Quebec's Alouette smelter, Canada's second-largest aluminum producer, announced a $1.5 billion expansion project. Backed by a long-term clean energy agreement with Hydro-Quebec, the deal secured decades of low-cost hydroelectric power for the Septiles plant, a move that sent shockwaves through global markets. The timing was impeccable. Just hours later, Donald Trump, campaigning from a Pennsylvania steel plant, electrified his base with a dramatic promise to double Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada to 50%. The crowd roared, but the markets recoiled. Within 24 hours, the Midwest Aluminum Premium, a critical cost indicator for U.S. manufacturers, surged by 54%, climbing from 37.5 cents to 58 cents per pound, according to the U.S. Midwest Premium Index. This wasn't mere political theater, it was economic whiplash that reverberated from Detroit's auto plants to Boeing's aerospace assembly lines. For years, the U.S. had leaned heavily on Canadian aluminum, importing over 3 million metric tons annually, roughly 44% of its total aluminum imports in 2023, per the U.S. International Trade Commission. By targeting this lifeline, Trump's tariff hike disrupted a delicate supply chain that fueled industries from automotive to aerospace. American manufacturers, caught off guard, faced immediate cost spikes, with aluminum-intensive sectors like General Motors and Ford bracing for higher raw material bills. In June alone, GM paused 2 production lines in Ohio citing metal supply uncertainty, while Boeing issued internal memos warning of potential cost inflation in fuselage components. The ripple effects didn't stop at factory gates. Chemical manufacturers who use aluminum as a pricing benchmark for feedstock raised internal price forecasts, prompting speculation that central banks might need to adjust interest rate policies sooner than anticipated.
Dr. Marissa Kwan, a senior economist at the Bank of Korea, noted, "We monitor industrial metals like aluminum closely. When premiums spike, it often signals broader inflation risks across energy and manufacturing."
In Brussels, ECB advisor Jean-Paul Lewan echoed the sentiment, warning that a sustained surge in aluminum prices could disrupt everything from packaging to construction, potentially forcing a reassessment of monetary policy timelines.
While the U.S. grappled with self-inflicted economic turbulence, Canada moved with precision and purpose. Rather than retaliating with emotional rhetoric, Ottawa orchestrated a strategic counteroffensive. The Canadian government accelerated its $1.5 billion investment in the Alouette smelter and began rerouting aluminum exports to Europe and Asia. According to Global Affairs Canada, over 3.2 million metric tons of Canadian aluminum were redirected to buyers in Germany, Japan, and South Korea, many of whom secured long-term contracts at pre-tariff prices.
In Berlin, Dr. Klaus Richter, a senior procurement executive at BMW Group, praised Canada's aluminum as a strategic hedge, clean, reliable, and shielded from US volatility.
In Tokyo, Mitsubishi Materials Chief Supply Officer Hiroshi Yamamoto emphasized the value of Canada's stability, stating, "With American tariffs rising unpredictably, Canada offers long-term certainty, which matters to our electric vehicle roadmap."
These weren't just business deals, they were a geopolitical statement. Canada was no longer just a supplier, it was a global player rewriting the rules of trade. The secret to Canada's success lay in its clean energy advantage. Hydro-Quebec's grid, powered by over 93% renewable hydroelectricity, gave Canadian aluminum a competitive edge that U.S. smelters, still reliant on coal and natural gas, couldn't match. In Montreal's commodity trading circles, whispers turned to consensus. Canada's low-carbon aluminum could undercut U.S. prices by 15% to 20%. The EU Commission labeled Canadian aluminum a strategic material. granting it preferential access under future decarbonization trade rules. This wasn't just about cost, it was about aligning with the global push for sustainability. As the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism loomed, taxing high-carbon imports, Canada's clean grid positioned it as Europe's preferred supplier. EU trade data showed an 18% surge in Canadian aluminum exports to Europe between May and July 2025, with Germany, France and the Netherlands leading the charge. In Asia, Japanese and South Korean automakers updated procurement contracts to secure Canadian supply for their expanding EV production lines. Even China, long reliant on US bauxite, placed orders for over 400,000 tons of Canadian ingots by early July, while India's Hindalco and Japan's UACJ Corp entered advanced talks with Quebec smelters. Canada's pivot wasn't just about redirecting exports, it was a full-scale economic reorientation. Ottawa declared aluminum a strategic national asset, prioritizing its use in defense contracts, energy infrastructure, and national stockpiles. All new naval vessels, airframes, and electric grid expansions were mandated to use domestically sourced aluminum, a policy expected to shift over $700 million annually in federal procurement. To stabilize its industry, the Canadian government launched a $10 billion tariff relief loan program, offering zero-interest credit lines to smelters and manufacturers in vulnerable regions like Saguenay, Lac Saint-Jean, Hamilton, and Windsor. Smaller producers in British Columbia also benefited, ensuring cash flow stability in the face of US tariffs. But Canada's ambitions went beyond defense. Infrastructure upgrades at the Port of Saguenay, a critical node for outbound aluminum, were fast-tracked. By May 2025, the Duncan and Marcel Dion docks had been retrofitted to handle Panamax-class vessels carrying over 69,000 tons each. New direct rail corridors connected these docks to inland smelters, bypassing U.S. customs zones entirely. The Canada Infrastructure Bank estimated that these upgrades would cut export times to Europe by 20% and reduce over 12,000 tons of CO2 emissions annually. In 2023, Saguenay handled 718,600 tons of cargo. By 2025, throughput was projected to exceed 1.2 million tons, making it one of North America's fastest-growing mineral ports. This logistical overhaul wasn't just about efficiency, it was a blueprint for resilience. As U.S. manufacturers struggled with soaring costs and supply shortages, Canadian markets reacted with calculated confidence. On July 7, 2025, Toronto Stock Exchange futures climbed between 0.2% and 2%. Reflecting investor faith in Ottawa's layered response. Behind the scenes, Canadian policymakers prepared for the next phase. On July 21st, Canada planned to implement mirror tariffs against the U.S., including a tariff rate quota capping non-free trade agreement imports at 2024 levels. According to the Ministry of Finance, this policy would impact over 1.8 million metric tons of incoming aluminum and steel, rerouting billions in trade. Reciprocal procurement rules, effective since June 30th, forced foreign firms, including U.S. defense contractors, to prove equivalent access for Canadian companies in public tenders, affecting over 21 billion Canadian dollars in federal infrastructure contracts. These measures weren't just retaliatory, they were a strategic redesign of Canada's economic future, signaling to Washington that Ottawa would not be cowed by trade wars. The broader implications of Canada's strategy extended beyond aluminum. By aligning its exports with global ESG standards, Ottawa carved out a leadership role in the low-carbon supply chain of the future. The Septiles plant, employing over 900 workers, was set to produce 620,000 tons of primary aluminum annually, all powered by renewable energy, enough to support the frame production of over 1.2 million electric vehicles. This wasn't just a win for Canada's economy, it was a geopolitical triumph. As the EU and OECD reviewed electric vehicle incentives and carbon border adjustment mechanisms, Canada leveraged its stable power grid, clean metals, and geographic position to push for deeper trade concessions. Even environmental groups took notice. In a joint statement, Greenpeace Canada and Equiterre hailed the shift as a rare case of economic retaliation that delivers ecological progress, citing the move toward electric port cranes, expanded rail-to-ship intermodal yards, and reduced reliance on diesel trucks. While Canada surged forward, the U.S. faced a slow-rolling crisis. A June 2025 survey by the National Association of Manufacturers found that 68% of U.S. manufacturers had experienced disruptions to production schedules, with 34% reporting supplier changes, that added 6 to 8 weeks of delay to major deliveries. As Europe and Asia locked in pre-tariff deals with Canadian producers, U.S. automakers like Ford and GM faced soaring raw material costs. General Motors CEO Mary Barra, speaking on a Q2 earnings call, described the situation as input volatility like we haven't seen in years. Aerospace giants like Boeing grappled with similar challenges, warning of potential cost inflation in critical components. The U.S. risked becoming an outlier, paying more and delivering slower, while Canada emerged as a trusted, green, and resilient alternative. Canada's trade pivot extended beyond aluminum, signaling a broader diversification strategy. In May 2025, Canadian exports to non-U.S. markets surged 5.7%, reaching a historic 60.81 billion Canadian dollars, according to Statistics Canada. Gold exports to the UK spiked 30.1%, driven by central bank buying and bullion hedging. Canadian crude oil found new demand in Singapore as Asian buyers pivoted from Middle Eastern suppliers. Pork exports to Japan rose 11.8%, fueled by enhanced cold chain logistics, while pharmaceutical shipments to Italy jumped 22.5%, driven by demand for Quebec-based biotech compounds. Small and medium enterprises, from Ontario's machine tool exporters to British Columbia's niche garment manufacturers, capitalized on frameworks like the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, with SMEs accounting for 32% of new export contracts signed outside North America, up from 18% 5 years ago. This wasn't just economic maneuvering, it was a symbolic rebuke to Washington. By broadening its customer base, Canada reduced its exposure to U.S. tariffs while gaining leverage in multilateral trade talks, particularly around electric vehicle credits, critical minerals, and digital services. In Ontario, 2 new electric vehicle battery component plants broke ground in the Greater Toronto Area in June 2025, backed by $2.1 billion in public-private financing. These facilities, set to supply both domestic and European EV makers, were projected to create over 3,400 jobs by 2026. In Manitoba, the Kiask generating station, backed by Manitoba Hydro, scaled up output to meet aluminum export demand, with green energy investments surging 11% quarter-over-quarter. Canada's aerospace sector, led by companies like Bombardier and Magellan Aerospace, also flexed its muscles, with exports of aircraft and components surpassing $19 billion in 2023. Quebec's government committed over $700 million annually to R&D in advanced composites, flight simulators, and sustainable aviation fuels, aligning with new green aviation regulations in the EU and Japan. As the July 21, 2025, deadline for the next U.S. tariff review loomed, the stakes couldn't be higher. Canada's bold strategy had flipped the narrative, turning a defensive maneuver into an economic transformation. If Ottawa maintained its cost and emissions edge, the next chapter of global manufacturing might be written not in Texas or Tokyo, but in the heart of Quebec. Yet risks remained. Experts like Professor Jean-Pierre Brunet from Laval University warned that prolonged tariffs could threaten over 7,000 jobs in Canada's aluminum sector. S&P Global Canada's manufacturing PMI, at 45.6 in July, signaled a 5th consecutive month of contraction, with cross-border trade collapsing to its worst level since May 2020. But within the slump, a story of resilience emerged. Non-U.S. export orders rose 3.4%, the first increase since late 2024. The aluminum standoff had become more than a trade dispute. It was a test of economic agility in a fractured world. Canada's 3-phase model, retaliate, redirect, reform, offered a blueprint for how a mid-sized economy could punch above its weight. By leveraging clean energy, smart logistics, and long-term diplomacy, Ottawa sidestepped nearly $30 billion in retaliatory U.S. tariffs. From the factories of Toronto to the smelters of Septiles, Canada sent a clear message: resilience is leverage. As industries from Detroit to Dusseldorf watched, the question loomed: could the U.S. halt Canada's rise, or would it fall further behind? For now, the global metal game had shifted north, and the world awaited the next move.